Welcome to Impact Signals, social impact at the scale of AI. I'm Charlie.
And I'm Sarah.
It's Thursday, March 12th, 2026, and this is episode 28. Today, we're going deep on recovery, how AI tools are being deployed not just to respond to disasters, but to rebuild after them, and some hard data on why those tools still aren't reaching the people who need them most. We're starting in Sri Lanka, where Cyclone Ditwah made landfall earlier this week. UNDP has deployed its RAPIDA framework, that stands for Rapid Integrated Post-Disaster Assessment. They're in the field right now conducting key informant interviews to generate an early damage and recovery needs estimate.
And that's the key word, early. Traditional post-disaster needs assessments used to take 3 to 6 weeks. RAPIDA compresses that to days by using structured digital data collection with AI-assisted analysis on the back end. You get a recovery plan entry point before the relief operation is even winding down.
The Disaster Management Center of Sri Lanka also issued a situation report on March 11th, confirming active emergency operations are still running. So we have a situation where response and early recovery planning are happening in parallel.
That's actually one of the hardest operational problems. When do you shift from emergency mode to recovery mode? RAPIDA's value is that it forces that question early with data. For practitioners listening, the methodology is publicly documented by UNDP and has been used across multiple disaster contexts. If your organization is responding to Ditwah or planning for similar events in the Pacific or Indian Ocean region, this is worth looking at directly.
Staying on cyclones, but zooming out to the science of predicting them. Rice University published a study this week in the Journal of Geophysical Research Atmospheres, evaluating how AI weather models perform on tropical cyclone data from the 2020 through 2025 North Atlantic and Pacific seasons.
The findings are both encouraging and important to understand clearly. AI models, they tested Penghu weather and aurora, are delivering track and landfall accuracy that's comparable to traditional physics-based ensemble models, but they generate those forecasts in minutes instead of hours.
That's significant for anticipatory action timelines, but there's a critical gap.
There is. The AI models systematically underestimate peak wind speeds and minimum central pressure, the two numbers that tell you how destructive the storm will be when it arrives. Lead author Avantika Gori called the findings reassuring, but explicitly said intensity forecasting still requires hybrid approaches.
So the practical implication for humanitarian planners is?
AI tells you where. Traditional models tell you how bad. For evacuation routing and pre-positioning decisions, AI gives you an extended lead time advantage, but for scaling your emergency stockpiles and shelter capacity, how many people need to shelter in place versus evacuate, you still need the full physics-based ensemble. Don't let the speed of the AI forecast lead you to skip the intensity analysis.
This matters especially for small island developing states, places like Vanuatu, Tonga, Fiji, where the difference between a Category 3 and a Category 5 forecast determines whether you have enough time to get people out. On the subject of getting forecasts to people who need them, India's Meteorological Department announced this week the deployment of AI tools at national scale, including a system called AIDT, AI-based cyclone intensity prediction, alongside Global Foundation models Penghu and GraphCast running on government supercomputers. The technical deployment is notable, but what's actually significant here is the integration with Bashini, India's multilingual AI platform. Farmer alerts are now being delivered in regional languages, not just Hindi or English, but regional languages, across a country with 22 official languages and hundreds of dialects. You can have the most accurate forecast model in the world, and it does nothing if the alert arrives in a language the farmer doesn't read.
Exactly. And this is a template that's directly applicable across South and Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Philippines, Bangladesh, anywhere you have high linguistic diversity and a large agricultural population that needs last-mile climate information. The Bashini architecture is open source. For practitioners in those contexts, this is worth understanding technically, not just as a news story.
India's deployment also reflects a broader pattern we're seeing. National meteorological agencies are no longer waiting for international organizations to bring AI tools to them. They're building and deploying domestically on their own supercomputing infrastructure. Let's move to our deep dive for today's Thursday recovery focus. FAO published its Emergency and Resilience Plan for Mozambique this morning, a 3-year framework running from 2026 through 2028.
Mozambique has been through a brutal sequence. Cyclone Idai in 2019, then Kenneth, then Freddie in 2023, one of the strongest tropical cyclones ever recorded in the Southern Hemisphere. Each time, the recovery is incomplete before the next event hits.
FAO's three-year plan targets agricultural livelihood recovery and climate-smart rebuilding, not just getting farmers back to baseline, but restructuring agricultural systems to withstand the next cyclone.
And this is where AI integration matters for the long term. Multi-year recovery frameworks create the funding and planning horizon that monitoring and early warning tools need to move from pilots to embedded practice. A 6-month emergency program can't justify the data infrastructure investment. A 3-year recovery plan can.
For practitioners, the significance of this announcement is less about the specific interventions and more about what a committed recovery timeline enables. Organizations working on agricultural AI tools, crop monitoring, soil health analysis, climate adaptation modeling, these are the deployments that become viable when a recovery program has multi-year commitment behind it.
Mozambique's eastern coast is also one of the most data-poor disaster zones in Africa. A 3-year FAO program builds the ground truth data that makes any AI monitoring system actually work. They're creating the substrate.
We have to talk about the displacement picture in the Middle East. UNHCR reported today that up to 3.2 million Iranians are temporarily displaced as conflict continues to intensify. That's a multilingual, multi-format report published in English, Arabic, French, and Spanish, which is itself a signal about the scale of international coordination being requested.
3.2 million people is not a number that fits inside any existing humanitarian information system without strain. At that scale, every AI-assisted tool, registration, case management, needs assessment, supply chain optimization, gets stress-tested simultaneously.
And we've covered over the past several weeks how biometric registration infrastructure, like the Brave system, and AI-assisted case management tools have been scaling up. This is the operational context they're being deployed into.
The CFR noted this week that the broader conflict is also disrupting global humanitarian supply chains and pushing oil prices up, which compresses the logistical margins that AI supply chain optimization works within. These systems perform best in semi-stable environments. When access routes are physically cut, the algorithm has nothing to optimize. Human judgment, physical access, and diplomatic negotiation become the binding constraints.
It's a useful reminder that AI tools are multipliers. They multiply the effectiveness of what's already working. They don't substitute for access. And now the story, I think, is the most operationally significant thing we've covered this week. And it's not about a new tool. It's about the ground that new tools are being deployed into. ICT Works published an analysis this week of the IMF's AI Preparedness Index.
The headline numbers are stark. Advanced economies average a score of 0.68 on the AIPI. Emerging markets score 0.46. Low-income countries, where the majority of disaster-affected populations live, score 0.32.
And the IMF quantified the infrastructure deficit. Sub-Saharan Africa needs $418 billion in investment to achieve affordable universal broadband. That's 4.5% of the region's entire GDP, compared to 0.02% for advanced economies.
The data cost problem is equally stark. Mobile data in Sub-Saharan Africa costs $20.
For anyone designing AI risk scoring or early warning systems, this is the bias that can redirect aid away from the most vulnerable. The ODI recommendation is to conduct a deliberate data gap analysis before deploying any composite risk score. Where are we not collecting data? And what does that mean for who the model sees as low risk?
ACAR's overall framing is that AI strengthens rather than replaces professional expertise. That's the consensus across the sector right now, but the data scarcity bias finding is the sharpest operational warning we've seen this week.
Quick look at the calendar before we close out. Today is the final day of Humanitarian Networks and Partnerships Week 2026 in Geneva. HNPW concludes this morning. EU AI Week runs through Saturday in Brussels, with implementation milestones for the EU AI Act.
The urgent one is the WSIS prizes deadline. That's March 15th, 3 days from now. If you or your organization is working on an AI or ICT project with impact and sustainable development, the ITU's WSIS prizes are one of the most recognized awards in the field. The AI for Planet category is directly relevant to climate resilience and disaster risk reduction work. 3 days.
NVIDIA GTC starts March 17th in San Jose with an AI for Good track. Expect humanitarian AI deployment announcements. Disasters Expo USA is March 18th and 19th in Anaheim. The AAAI Spring Symposium on AI and Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Response is March 24th through 26th at Stanford. That's the premier academic practitioner bridge conference for this field.
And RightsCon opens March 28th in Nairobi, focused on digital rights and AI governance, directly relevant to anyone working on responsible humanitarian AI deployment. That's Impact Signals for Thursday, March 12th, 2026. If this briefing is useful, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out at impactsignals.ai and share it with someone working in the field.
Stay ready.